I'm Ellis Martin. Join me now for a conversation with Adam Smith, co-founder and vice president of business development for Oroco Resource Corp, a public mineral exploration company trading on the TSX Venture Exchange under the symbol OCO, and in the U.S. on the OTCQB market under the symbol ORRCCF. Oroco is focused on the development of a large copper deposit in the Santo Tomas project in coastal northwest Mexico. Oroco currently has an 8.5 billion pound copper endowment announced in May of this year after an extensive drill program. Copper mineralization at Santo Tomas is located at surface and therefore potentially amenable to low-cost mining methods. It's very well located with respect to the infrastructure that's essential to a large mining operation, and Mexico is among the world's top mining jurisdictions, with laws and trade agreements that protect the rights of mining companies. Since commencing exploration and resource definition at Santo Tomas 3 years ago, Oroco has made a series of rapid advances. These milestones will be achieved against the backdrop of a positive forecast for the price of copper, possibly to historical highs, as a result of dramatic shifts in metal's importance to industrial and consumer markets. Adam, welcome to the program. It's great to visit with you today at the end of 2023.
Hi, Ellis. Yeah, good to see you. Last time we met, we were overseas in London at Mines and Money, and we had a good chat. It's been a great year of telling the Oroco Resource Corp story for you, and I'd like to end the year by talking about some of the things that have developed since we spoke last. Capital markets change fast, and the day after we spoke, both of us got on an airplane to come home, and the mood at that conference was quite negative. There is widespread recognition of the need for a greater metal supply to meet decarbonization and renewable goals, but capital has not moved into the space. And that was a lament heard frequently at that conference. But the very next day, as I got on the airplane, I opened up the Financial Times as the plane was taking off, and the headline was, "Investors Rush to Riskier Assets in Expectations of Rate Cuts." Between the time the plane took off and the plane landed, the Canadian markets were open. Our stock was up 20% that day and again rose the following Monday and Tuesday. So there's been some developments since we spoke last, both in capital markets and more specifically in copper markets. There's an expectation that rates will come down as inflation comes down, and certainly inflation prints at the end of November have shown that inflation is coming down. And then copper, there's been a big reversal in copper markets where what had been expected to be surpluses of production over demand next year have now flipped to the expectation of deficits. 6 of 8 of the world's major copper producers have provided forward guidance for lower copper production than was expected, and a couple of the world's biggest copper mines have come offline. Notably, 1.5% of world copper production has come offline as a result of political and operating license dispute in Panama. We appear to be heading into 2024 with expectations of deficits and higher copper prices, and expectations that as inflation comes down, there'll be rate cuts, most notably from the U.S. Fed, and that will spur equity markets and capital markets. And indeed, the Dow has been rallying for the last several weeks on those expectations. The world's biggest mining companies have been rallying as well. That rally extended to mid-tier copper producers a few weeks ago. It has not yet extended to the small companies like ourselves, the sub-billion-dollar market cap companies and the developers of assets like ours. Those companies usually are the last to join the party. They're the first into a bear market, and they're the last out of a bear market. But right now we're seeing all the things that you would expect ahead of juniors re-rating through improved equity markets, and copper specifically looks to have a tailwind going into 2024. The value of companies like Oroco has been beaten down over the last 18 months from fear of recession and falling copper prices, but we now appear to be in a situation where that could reverse and the cyclicality could work in our favor.
While you and I were at London just a few weeks ago with the Mines and Money conference, I was doing an interview with Paul Harris of Kitco and quoted myself. I made a prediction of $5 copper over the next 12 to 16 to 18 months for all the reasons that you mentioned and more. I think with reduction in inflation and the impetus to basically restart a lot of the construction that has waned here during the last year and a half or so, we have a stagnant real estate market here in the U.S. There's not a lot of new construction. I think that added on to the supply and demand issues, and again, everything that you mentioned, will drive that price up to $5, considering that there's not going to be a lot of new copper production coming online in the very near future. So essentially, Adam, capital spending and new copper production is at historic lows, and our needs in the future really weigh heavily into perhaps a $5 price for copper in 2024. It would be great to see that for all parties concerned. And at what point do you think it will trickle down to the juniors such as Oroco?
Typically that happens after trends are well established. The big caps have moved clearly on expectations of rate cuts, but we're going to need to see copper prices perk up a little bit. They have risen 5 or 6% in the last month or so, but I think for the risk on trade to really take hold, we're going to need to see copper prices perk up, maybe to over $4. The world will be convinced, and we're just several cents away from that now. So analysts really they're united in terms of positive perspective for copper in the medium and long term. We know that over the next couple of decades, we're going to have to mine as much copper as we have in all of industrial history. And we know the pipeline is bare. The cupboard is nearly bare in terms of new copper mines to put into production. The medium long term, I think we're pretty clearly aligned with. And last year, for instance, investment in copper intensive renewable energy generation exceeded investment in new fossil fuel production. So the trend is well established. We're probably one or two rolls of the snowball away from it being big enough to really be understood by everybody and by the investment community, and for copper demand to start to exceed supply. We're 1 or 2 years away from that, but we're going to need to see slightly higher copper prices. $5 would be amazing. It would cause, I think, a re-rating of all the copper producers, of all the copper juniors like ourselves. Our recently announced preliminary economic assessment showed that there's tremendous leverage to copper. There's a disproportionate or an exponential rise in our net asset value with a rise in copper prices. A rise of copper of just 20% above 385 doubles the net asset value, doubles the present value of future cash flows for Santo Tomas. So assets like ours are tremendously leveraged. And I think if investors understand the copper market and copper thesis, they will be looking for copper exposure. There's many ways to get that, and companies like ours offer disproportionate leverage to rising copper prices.
Now, I have to ask you this, Adam, because I'm completely curious about it, and I've seen these things happen in other jurisdictions around the world. How fast can we build a mine at Santo Tomas? That's not your intention, because you will turn it over to a major eventually for that to happen, but how fast can it happen?
We have operated in Mexico since 2006. We permitted our first mine in under a year in a state just to the north of the state where Santo Tomas is located. So we know that it's a pragmatic jurisdiction. We know that it's a mining culture. The government and citizens are very accustomed to mining. It's a big part of the economy. It's a big part of who they are. So we know that the Mexican government, Mexican people accept mining, and we know that they permit projects fairly quickly. Now, this is a significantly bigger project than our last one, but I think the same mindset applies. And you're right, our intention here, and I really do think as we advance the project and de-risk it and the copper resource grows, we will get acquisitive interest from a major mining company, because this is a big project. Porphyry copper deposits like Santo Tomas, as demonstrated by our recent PEA, they've got the ability to generate $1 billion annually in revenue and huge amounts of profit and run for decades and over multiple mining cycles. So they are the assets that the majors are looking for. It will be a major in all likelihood that puts this in production and permits it. But I think in the case of Santo Tomas, I would say you'd have a 2 or 3 year process to permit this, a 2 or 3 year process to build it. And that's in contrast to projects we see in other parts of the world where they may be 10 or 20, 30 years into those projects and they haven't advanced past the permitting stage because those permits are denied by their local jurisdictions. Santo Tomas has some advantages because of where it's situated from a permitting and build-out perspective. And it's got huge advantages as well because of its location just in Mexico, but its location within Mexico, 100 miles to a deep water port within the Pacific Gateway, La Entrada al Pacifico, which is a multimodal trade and transport area designated by U.S. legislation from 1992 and built jointly with the Mexican government. It's got rail, high-pressure gas pipeline, highway, deep water port, and it's an area where big industry is expected. In fact, just at the beginning of this month, there was an announcement of the construction of a new methanol production facility at that port at Topolobampo, 160 kilometers, 150 miles from Santo Tomas, touted as the largest producer of green ethanol on the planet. So this is an industrial region with the support of government, support of population, and I think a relatively clear line of sight to production. And I think that contrasts nicely with other undeveloped copper projects in the world right now that have, in some cases, multi-decade timelines to be put in production.
And a lot of them will never get done.
And some of them will never get done. That's absolutely true. If a big copper company is going to make a big investment, and these are multi-billion-dollar investments, they want a clear line of sight to development. And I think Santo Tomas offers that.
I know it's an opinion, but it's an educated opinion. But what is your opinion about 2024, copper markets, equity markets in general?
Ellis, I will say that Given that the last time we spoke, front page of the Financial Times the next day talked about markets returning to growth companies like ourselves and capital market conditions improving, I'll say you're my lucky talisman. And I will think between now and into the first quarter of next year, we will see a continuation of this positive trend, declining inflation, expectations of rate cuts, improving commodity prices. And so we're looking at almost the exact opposite setup for 2024 that we had for 2023, which was dominated by the fear of recession and rising rates and falling commodity prices. So I can see 2024 being a year of growth for companies like ourselves, a year of re-rating. We've got a $1.24 billion US dollar net asset value as proven by a recent preliminary economic assessment. And our market cap is just somewhere around 4 or 5% of that. I think there's a ton of upside for projects like ours and companies like ours in improving capital markets and with improving commodity prices. So I'm going into 2024 really quite optimistic. And for Oroco, it's a year where we can take this project from the preliminary study to a more advanced study. We can continue to grow the size of the copper resource. So I see positives all around for us. I see a great entry point for investors in our current share price. And I'm going to recharge my batteries over the next couple of weeks and come into 2024 full of enthusiasm.
I've been speaking with Adam Smith, co-founder and vice president of business development for Oroco Resource Corp. Oroco trades on the TSX Venture Exchange under the symbol OCO and in the U.S. on the OTCQB market under the ticker symbol ORRCCF. Go to the company's website, orocoresourcecorp.com. For Adam Smith and Oroco Resource Corp, I'm Ellis Martin.
Would you like to be one of the first to see who we are following? Subscribe to our audio newsletter. It's free. EllisMartinReport.com.